The doctor is in. Hi, for anyone who doesn't know me by now, my name is Dr. Cynthia Elise Smith, and I am an anti racism, anti white supremacism educator and essayist specializing in essays, lectures, excuse me for that noise, essays, lectures, discussions, presentations with alternative views on race, race as color, race as character, racism, white supremacy, whiteness, blackness, and value. All of that. I offer deeper, more critical perspectives on these subjects, including the potential implications of wording in the US language lexicon that are not ordinarily considered racialized because they may be euphemized, dog whistled, or couched within usually benign contexts. Now, I'm not here to change your mind, but to make you think critically about the subject matter I'm about to present. As you think critically, you may begin to change your own mind and understand that this presentation, lecture, essay, and or discussion is designed to make you think, but it's not designed to make you comfortable necessarily. Now, before I begin, I usually have to go through what is necessary in understanding the language system of racism and white supremacy because it is a language that is spoken. Those of you who took grammar in class, in school, those of you who paid attention need to understand or do understand the importance of the three C's of navigating through the language system of racism and white supremacy in particular. Um, because if you don't understand the language the way it is being conveyed to you, the actual way it is being conveyed to you, then you can be misled easily. You can be reduced to the point of just uh, useless debate on subjects of this kind. So I call these the three C's of navigating through the language system of racism and white supremacy. First one being comprehension. Comprehension is the most important because it is the essence of understanding what you are saying, being told, writing, or reading, or the ability of your mind to form and craft the imagery and concepts from these words that you hear or write or read. Something you're being told, or you write, or you read. Next is context. This is only second to comprehension, and it is the ability to understand the circumstances that form the setting for an event, statement, idea, effect, consequence, or solution, and in terms through which these can be fully identified, comprehended, and assessed, such as its value. Next is connotation. Now, connotation is the ability of the words to summon the emotions that you feel, if you're able to feel emotions, or an idea or feeling that a word invokes in addition to its literary or primary meaning. Connotation is particularly important because it is the feeling of the words, the reaction associated with a word. It is the expressive part, that part of the words, sentences, and paragraphs from thought that create the drama and cause people to react happily, sadly, violently, or otherwise. Now, for purposes of this essay lecture, these are the definitions of race, racist color, racist character, white supremacism, whiteness, and value that I'll be using. Now, the reason why I do this on every essay lecture that I do is because it's important for you to understand using those three C's that I explained to you are very important in the context of these definitions that I'm giving you. So, first up is race. Race is any one of the groups of humans based on physical traits regarded as common among people of shared ancestry. Race as color. It's when color is used to distinguish a race of people. Happens all over the world. Race as character. This is when character is used to distinguish a race of people. Now, the United States is particularly responsible for distinguishing Black people according to our cont of our character, although they are the ones who try to define our character for us. Next up is racism. Racism is very, very important to understand, people. You need to understand that it is the systemic U.S. through structurally designed discrimination and denial of opportunity, equity, equality, and justice, which is built into every institution in this country, even today, to formally control the enslaved and their descendants in perpetuity, meaning forever, after the enslavement ended and the enslaved were emancipated. It is not simply prejudice or bias and those associated behaviors. Think of it this way. This is the example I give. Can Black people despise white people? Absolutely. Can Black people hate white people because they're white? Yep. But can Black people as a collective suppress the vote, ban books by white authors simply on the basis of race or color, change history to sanitize it for the comfort of Black people, deny the very system was created in the first place in the face of overwhelming generational evidence that exists to this day? That answer is no. That is exclusively whiteness at work, using the mechanism of racism as that unbleached definition I gave you describes. Now, next is white supremacism. White supremacism is the ideology that uses the color white and whiteness as a value and merit measurement. It is a metric where superiority and goodness align with the color white and the color black, and blackness are aligned as bad and inferior, each having been assigned generations ago to skin color. We all know that the colors black and white have meanings that go well beyond white supremacism and racism. It even falls outside of it altogether, and falls into religion and other aspects of language. Um, but they have a meaning, and those meanings are white as pure, chaste, all of those wonderful things, and black as bad, dirty, sooty, all of the bad things. So then when you apply that to a person's skin color, imagine the value that they are presenting to a human being based on those two colors. Why aren't other colors? That'd be a question. Why aren't other colors given the same kind of uh, importance in terms of definition in this society? Green is green, blue is blue, red is red. but black and white have specific value meanings. Okay? Whiteness. Whiteness is the theory that skin pigmentation or the assignment of that color white to imply skin color grants the individual with certain natural rights and privileges. The indoctrinated perception is of complete sovereignty over and above anything else on the planet Earth. Last but not least is value, which is the desirability of a thing, often in respect of some property, such as usefulness or exchangeability, worth, merit, or importance. Value is so important to understand within the context of racism and white supremacy because it has an intrinsic association with the terms race, racist color, racist character, racism, and white supremacy. Because value is the codifier for these terms, providing both context and connotation and leading to a better comprehension of each. Now, today's essay is called, oh, hold on one second while I fix something very, very important in terms of what our essay is going to be on. So give me about, let me see, give me about 30 seconds or a little bit more to get the information up for you. It seems it will take a little longer. So give me another 30 seconds. Okay, I have gotten beyond what I needed to do, and I am ready to tell you what the name of this essay is called. It is called Slave and Slavery. The enslavement, slave and slavery versus the enslavement and enslaved person. Emancipating semantics. Something for you to think about during this essay is, why are they different? Why are these terms different? Okay, so that is the framing. When people try to justify American slavery or the enslavement, whether for academic research or casual conversation, they often rely on the argument that slavery has existed for thousands of years. However, this argument can make slavery seem less significant in history. Additionally, there are references and stories about white people being held as slaves throughout history, which can also have an effect of diminishing the impact of American slavery on African people who were forcibly brought to these shores. many generations ago. Now, hold on one second. Hold on one second ago. Okay, hold on one second. It should be evident that slavery was a significant issue in American history, especially considering its role in causing the Civil War. However, some liberal white Americans tend to shy away from discussing the cruelty of slave owners, even if they acknowledge the link between slavery and the war. Conversely, more Americans than commonly believed argue that the war was about states' rights, and they may choose to keep their opinions to themselves or express them openly among themselves. In an article in the Washington Post called Lots of Americans Don't Think Slavery Caused the Civil War, John Sides discussed views held by most average Americans on the subject of slavery in the United States. In the article, he quoted John Kelly, chief of staff to former President Donald Trump, who stated in an interview, "I would tell you that Robert E. Lee was an honorable man. He was a man that gave up his country to fight for his state, which 150 years ago was more important than country. It was always loyalty to state first back in those days. It is different today. But the lack of ability to compromise led to the Civil War. And men and women of good faith on both sides made their stand where their conscience had them make their stand." Listen to that. Do you hear that statement? Do you hear that statement? Let me read that again. I would tell you that Robert E. Lee, now, if you don't know who Robert E. Lee was, he was the general and in charge of basically the Civil War. Robert E. Lee would have, what I believe he was even the president of the Confederacy. I'm not sure about that. I'll have to check on that reference, and I'll put something in the comments later. But I know he was a general in the war. And he says, "I would tell you that Robert E. Lee was an honorable man. He was a man that gave up his country to fight for his state." Now, that statement right there is ridiculous. What was the state, if not part of the country? He gave up his country to fight for his state, which 150 years ago was more important than country. To who? And why? It was always loyalty to the state back in those days. Why? Now it's different today. But the lack of an ability to compromise led to the Civil War, and men and women of good faith on both sides made their stand where their conscience had them make their stand. Now, this statement and others like it are immediate in glorifying the humanity of individuals responsible for enslavement and the war without discussing the inhumanity of those same people to the people in bondage, of whom there is no mention. The audacity in the statement, lacking of ability to compromise, led to the Civil War, and any notion of men and women of good faith on both sides should send painful tremors into the souls of anyone thinking any discussion of the enslavement of humans was capable of compromise. Now, rushing to amend Kelly's statement as one belonging only to the military and not average Americans, Sides pointed to Post writers Greg Jaffe and Ann Gearin, who reported that military officials took issue with Kelly's remarks. And while the product of a somewhat cloistered view of the conflict inculcated in military officers, this confined view was not shared by the general public. Cloistered, confined, please. They were trying to say That this is just among a very few of those people in the military. Analyzing the status of opinions on the cause of slavery in the U.S. at the 150th anniversary of the Civil War in 2011, Sides cited a number of polls that asked what the general population thought started the war. According to the Pew poll, when asked what their impression of the cause of the war was, 48% of said states' rights, and 38% said slavery. The CBS NYT poll, New York Times poll, placed 50% on states' rights and 37% on slavery. The 60 Minutes Vanity Fair poll was even higher at 53% on states' rights and 37% on slavery. The CNN ORC poll approached the question differently. Rather than impressions of the cause of the war, they asked what they thought was the reason for seceding from the Union. Within this context, 54% stated slavery as the cause for secession, and 42% chose states' rights. According to those surveys, however, the average American does not consider slavery to be the main cause of the Civil War. It is highly probable that generations of educational indoctrination have influenced the way people think about certain topics. When it comes to the history of this country, much of what we learn is through educational institutions that have been steeped in racism and white supremacism. Additionally, it's possible that white Americans may not view the term slavery as seriously as they should, which would explain why most do not have a strong emotional connection to its history other than a sanitized view of a glorified Dixie South seemingly gone with the wind. On the other hand, if the true horrors of slavery were better understood by all, particularly Black people, then perhaps they would be less likely to broadly dismiss its significance. Among 21st century scholars and others who discuss the semantics of these terms, using the terms enslaved persons and the enslavement might even be considered an act of political correctness, akin to where other terms with connotations of fairness rather than crudeness are often relegated. The debate continues. Some attempts at changing the dynamics through the redefinition of these terms are being made. On websites such as the National Park Service's page discussing the Underground Railroad and the language of slavery, they are changing the way the two terms and others are expressed. As a note to its readers, they explain how they are in the process of revising their page, the National Underground Railroad Network to Freedom Program, to reflect accurate and contextual ways to talk about slavery, freedom, and the Underground Railroad. In their definition of terms, they include both terms, but are careful to describe them more accurately to reflect their connotations. For example, they define slave as a commonly used term to describe an enslaved African American, but one that suggests that the individual's identity was more fundamentally as property than as human. It can also suggest that the person accepted their enslavement as a definition of their own identity. Additionally, that word slave leaves out the presence of an enslaving individual or group whose ability of enforcement through violence backed the system of slavery. The National Park Service uses slave only when necessary in a historical context as part of a quote, preferring enslaved person as a more descriptive, complete choice. Now, some people would consider that political correctness. I consider that fairness. Fairness. They described an enslaved person rather than a slave in terms of how the former places the onus on forced bondage and brutality, family separation of loved ones, and death on the perpetrators of such events more effectively than the latter. During a thorough examination of grammatical elements for this essay, it was discovered that the suffix ry changes the stem word slave into a state or condition. That's it, just a state or condition. It has other meanings to other stem words, but it used slavery as an example of a state or condition with nothing else to describe the word when changed through use of the suffix ry. At this time, I'd like to ask and make sure that those of you of the illuminators who are in class today, if you're understanding what's going on so far, if you understand the context of this essay so far, would you put a light bulb in the chat so I can, or if you have any questions, you can ask a question. Say, put your put a pin in your question to ask me later. Okay? So if you put a light bulb in, if you're in here, I would really appreciate it because that'll let me know that the light bulb is on and that you understand what's being said so far. Vocabulary.com defines the word slavery and slave as coming from the Latin sclava or sclava, meaning Slavonic captive, referring to the 9th century slavery of Slavonic people, and first appeared as the word sklav or slave in English around 1290. The spelling of its original Slavic form, slave, first appeared in English in the 1500s. Now, the Bible is replete. Oh, it's among some of the first historical references, historical sources, complete with stories of slavery and people in bondage, escaping bondage, and being placed back into bondage. This essay, however, is not about the origins of slavery or the reasons why the nation went to war. Nevertheless, understanding the origins and evolution of terminology is crucial to appreciating its significance in modern history. Delving into the semantics of slavery can help clarify its relevance in today's educational context. What makes slavery different than the enslavement? How significant is the use of the initial capped the prefix in, and the suffix ment to change the context, connotation, and core comprehension of the action or event? Is it even necessary to include the capped, initial cap, to further validate the way the term is expressed? To begin, it is important to understand the significance of these grammatical elements. The APA, and the APA is used by colleges and universities similar to MLA. They're recommendations for grammar and punctuation. and format for scholarly papers and referencing. So the APA gives an initial cap T the hard and fast recommendation that a capital T is always used if the is the first word in a title. Conversely, there are many companies whose T in the is capitalized no matter where it appears in a sentence because it is part of the proper name and it seems to indicate a special quality, like something exceptional, different than other companies that might have similar names or descriptions. When reading the initial cap, the, whether in a title as part of a proper name or as part of a proper name, its use has the tendency to elevate what it is being used in. For example, the something. When used in a title, it portends virtually everything that will be contained after it. Meaning, when the such and such is part of a title, it pretty much lets you know what it's all going to be about, the importance of it. So this is important to remember. In, it's pronounced in, and it's defined as a prefix. Now, I need you to understand this and listen carefully. Critical thinking caps on. Critical thinking caps on. In, as a prefix, is defined as causing a person or thing to be in the place, condition, or state named by the stem word, which in this case is slave. More specifically, to confine in or place on, as in enshrine and thrown in tomb. To cause to be in, as in enslave, entrust, enrich, encourage, endear. To restrict in the manner named by the stem, which is slave, typically with the additional sense on all sides, completely entwine, encircle, enclose, entwine. So with a stem word such as slave, thinking caps on, it shouldn't be any stretch of anyone's imagination to see how important an assignment of the prefix in is to that stem word or root word slave. When meant is added as a suffix, it means an indication of a state, condition, or quality, or the result or product of an action. So, what do these grammatical elements mean when organized in a cohesive structure with their meanings? Well, it explains the incident. I'm getting ready to put it together. I want you to hear it. It explains the enslavement as the title of an action and event important by virtue of the special quality, something exceptional and different, completely heinous by its act of causing a person to what? To be in, to confine or place on, and to restrict in the matter named by the stem, typically with the additional sense on all sides, completely and as an indication of a state, condition, or quality, or the result of a product of an action, or product, the result or product of an action. It indicates that the enslavement and enslaved as a term holds much more significance than mere use of the term slavery, and slave for the millions of people commodified and dehumanized in the diaspora of enslavement in Western Hemisphere and the United States in particular. Clearly, the term slavery doesn't describe the condition or the quality of human life destroyed by actions and events in history in the same way, and why it is important not to trivialize the enslavement as just another event in history, in the history of the world, or as a a semantic euphemism, as for being politically correct, in the same way that slavery is denoted and connoted today. Slate Magazine's 2015 article entitled Slave or Enslaved Person by staff writer Katie Waldman examined the use of the terms, discussing the disagreement among scholars on its passive use to symbolize the past, or as a term that aggressively seeks to illustrate the magnitude of atrocities of racialized bondage in the US. Quoting someone described as an academic on a message board of humanities and social sciences discussions, Waldman conveyed, slave is reductive and static and does not accurately reflect reality. Enslaved individuals are complex human beings. In other words, the academic was saying the term slave was a crude way of describing a much more complicated people and reducing the human beings involved into a state of inhumanity, a rudimentary definition of people as a state of their being rather than as a state of institutionalized bondage and labor. In essence, shrinking an entire life experience to a non human noun was to reproduce the violence of slavery on a linguistic level, according to Waldman. Is it merely a matter of semantics, or is there something more nefarious at play? Given the nature of racialized language in the United States, where so called benign words or statements are often euphemized for the comfort of white folk and to hide the malicious intent directed at Black folk, it is not difficult to understand why the subject is discussed and debated as to the preferred usage of the terms and typically left to scholars to hash out. Perhaps the reason most Black people relegate slavery to the dust heap of history with no consequential inferences to the present is because of the function of the term linguistically as inconsequential. Perhaps the connotation surrounding the word slavery or slave triggers the deprivation of humanity associated with the people it is designed to describe rather than what they experience. Let me repeat that. Perhaps the connotation, feeling surrounding the word slavery or slave triggers the deprivation of humanity associated with the people it is designed to describe rather than what they experienced. In a nation where white supremacism demands its ideology to regard slavery euphemized as just a just as a peculiar institution, which is what they called it, the term the enslavement replaces the personhood of the slave with the actions of the people who perpetrated the atrocities. Just like systemic racism, white supremacist ideology considers it better to convolute the terms to pointless debate rather than own the responsibility for this particular action and event of bondage and dehumanization in modern history. Therefore, it doesn't matter whether slavery existed for eons, nor does it matter that white people were also slaves. In the United States, it makes more sense that there existed human beings brought over from their native country and enslaved, dehumanized, punished, and commodified. And it is about time the United States emancipated the semantics of these terms and stop playing racially linguistic games designed to dumb down, put to sleep, and gaslight the nation. That brings me to the end of this essay. And I see some people here that I'd like to acknowledge, some classmates that I'd like to acknowledge. God blesses 23. Hi. Miss Mahogany Blues, Nunya, Ruthless, Pixie Dust. How are you all? I don't see anybody else in the room, but like I said, it's okay to have small class sizes. I can devote the time and energy to those of you in the class. Thank you so much for coming to this essay lecture. Um, if you don't have any particular questions about it, or you'd rather discuss it in the chat, in the comments later, please feel free to do so. I do enjoy engagement and I do respond to the comments. There is something else. Let's see. I wanted to tell you this essay is also on. The essay is also on my website, which is www.calisewriter.com. And if you are not a member of a Medium, or for whatever reason you're not a member of Medium and you don't read it there, you can read it for free on my website. Also, you can find me on a whole plethora of platforms by following me on Linktree. That's https://linktr.ee/CAD Smith. Okay, that was what I wanted to let you know. And if there is nothing more, then I will bid you all a farewell until the next time. Well, I will say this. I am on a roll. I usually don't do more than one essay a month, if that. And I've already written 4 essays in the month of September. I am being inspired this month. And that's a good thing. That's a really good thing. Okay? Because when I'm inspired and I write, then I bring it to you to educate you so that you will understand this language of this racialized language of white supremacy and racism in the United States. That's my goal. That's my mission. I'll be doing that until I breathe my last breath on this earth. So thank you. I appreciate you all. For those of you who came in, please remember to hit the like button. If you're not a subscriber, please remember to subscribe. The last time I looked, I am at 899 subscribers. I am headed toward that big 1000, and I thank you all for that. Please feel free to share this video with anybody that you think will find this interesting and enlightening, and do engage, do comment, do talk about it. It's okay. We can talk about it. All right? For now, bye-bye.